After 9 trillion years, Tekken 8 is finally out in the hands of the public, and turns out everything I've been talking about is more relevant than ever. Tekken 8 has a much more explosive and interesting balance of offense and defense than at least Tekken 7 did, and with interactions getting faster and aggressive tools getting much stronger, it is even more important that you know how to respond optimally. So let's talk about the options and layers you have to be aware of in any situation. Good timing is more important than ever. It's what turns your bad low into damage and momentum, and what turns your opponent's good mid into a launch opportunity. The entirety of this game's offense and defense is how different options interact with different timings. To help you think about it a little bit more, you can very vaguely categorize someone's response timing into 3 categories: immediate timing, short delay timing, and long delay timing. Let me be clear, this is an oversimplification. The specifics are really important here, and timing is always best thought of in relative terms. But having some easy boxes to put things in your brain can help. Immediate timing is what it says on the box. The moment you recover from something, or the moment you get into range, you press a fast button. It is what you use to pressure someone who is respecting you and playing passively, or to press your frame advantage. But in general, this is the timing that is the most weak to movement. Short delay timing is a slower button pressed near immediately, or a fast button pressed with a small delay. Most homing moves live here, but fast pokes can also be used to beat movement if you delay the button press a little bit so that they realign with the opponent's movement or guard timing. Naturally, this is the timing that is the most weak to immediate timing counter hits. Long delay timing is more about playing reactively to the current situation with movement rather than a button. You're trying to create opportunities by sidestepping or backdashing, but without immediately threatening the opponent with a button. The rules for what can be sidestepped are a bit more fluid in Tekken 8. There's a lot more of the slow buttons that can be sidestepped much more easily, but also more fast buttons that are surprisingly tricky to avoid. Movement has the advantage that it doesn't have to be nearly as committal as pressing an attack, with the trade-off of it being a relatively passive option. As you can probably tell, this timing beats a lot of buttons that are pressed immediately, but is generally weaker to delay timing. You've heard a lot of people talk about the triangle of keep out, rush down, and whiff punishment, but in my opinion this is the more important triangle of options to have in your mind if you want to get better at Tekken. If you are able to precisely know the timing at which your opponent does things at all times, you'd basically have complete control over them, but that's not a super realistic thing to aim for a lot of the time. So it's more useful to try and categorize their responses and adapt your game plan at a macro level so that you're more likely to beat what they're doing than they are to beat what you're doing. Remember, timing is always discussed in relative terms. The way most people will talk about something like frame advantage in Tekken is that if you're plus, it's your turn to press a button. Aside from landing heat engagers, this usually isn't the case. Usually you're not plus enough to enforce every aspect of your mix-up through frames alone. We'll talk about mix-ups and defensive options more in a bit, but a better way to think about frame advantage is that it allows you to cover certain timings that the opponent can't. If you're plus 6, it's more helpful to think that, instead of it being your turn, your opponent's immediate timing responses are moved up to short delay timing. You have locked them out of immediate timing entirely, and you've made some aspects of their movement less effective. It's also always important to have a sort of anchor point in time to gauge these timings by. Close up, a useful anchor point is basically the end of any button-related interaction. You block a down forward 1, and your internal timing clock starts ticking the moment you or your opponent recover and are able to start doing things again. In neutral and at longer ranges, this gets a lot more fuzzy, and you'll have to observe your opponent for habits. But one common anchor point to look out for is right when someone gets into rage for their wall-running move while dashing at you. Again, I want to stress that this is an abstraction. Small changes to timing have huge changes in outcome, and success will come more frequently as you build up experience and intuition. This is just a way to start thinking about these things. With aggressive tools getting better in Tekken 8, it's also important to have a framework for playing defensively. The worst thing you can do in this game is put yourself in a situation where you're just guessing. You see your opponent in a position where they're about to push a mix-up and you preemptively guess high or low and commit to guarding that way for a bit. It's a fighting game, so there will always be some form of guessing. But your layer 1 defensive option should try to cover more than one thing. At their core, the following techniques are timing-based. Wow, what a surprise. You want to make an educated guess on your opponent's timing, pick a defensive option, and then immediately switch it to a different one when you predict one of your opponent's actions would connect. This requires knowledge of the options that your opponent's character can threaten you with, so it's important to familiarize yourself with every character's game plan. I go over these in more detail in my advanced defense video, but let's look at some examples. KBD High-Low Fuzzy defends against the two most common responses you'll see from your opponents: fast pokes and slow power lows. This takes advantage of the fact that the slow low can't threaten you on immediate timing due to its speed. It is forced to connect on short delay timing. You block high, optionally while backdashing, and you switch to momentarily blocking low a little bit before one of their power lows would connect. This option is weak against short delay timing mids, which might seem scary at first, but by encouraging your opponent to represent short delay timing more, you make your immediate timing option stronger. Sidestep block evades most small individual immediate timing pokes and guards against short delay timing tracking moves. You sidestep for a time, then immediately switch to blocking a little bit before one of your opponent's tracking moves would connect. The faster your opponent's homing moves, the less time you can spend sidestepping safely, meaning the less effective your sidestep will be. If executed perfectly, this technique is largely just vulnerable to tracking lows, or at worst you'll block a string or power mid from your opponent. But it's very difficult to always time it well enough to not leave yourself vulnerable, especially in Tekken 8 now that small pokes can have very good tracking against a particular side. Delayed getup mitigates the risk from your opponent's vortex. The two most common things your opponent will do after knocking you down with a Hell Sweep or a similar type of move are: they will immediately go for another mix-up to take advantage of your get-up frames, or try to react to you staying on the floor and do a delayed ground hitting move. So you stay on the floor for a little bit to avoid the immediate 50-50 and get up at a delayed timing, dealing with the much lower threat from the ground hitting move. This option is obviously weak to immediate timing ground hitting moves or the 50-50 at a delayed timing, but as you can tell, neither of these is optimal against most other things you can do. And this is kind of the theme with advanced defense in Tekken. Everything you do at any point is strong against some things and weak against others. But it pays off to do something that is strong against multiple common options. If you're fuzzy guarding against an opponent who does not understand what you're doing and keeps representing only immediate timing options, you will have a distinct advantage throughout the entirety of your set with them. If you're doing it against an opponent who does understand it, you're conditioning them to change their behavior in ways you can later exploit. At its best, Tekken is a dance of constant adaptations and timing changes. If you want to improve, it's very important that you're not only aware of it, but that you have a framework to describe and understand it with in the moment. I hope this information helps you improve. See you in 2025!